Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. And if you're new to my channel, hello, my name is Gabby and welcome. If you've never been here before, never watched any of my videos, have no idea what I do, I cover true crime cases and all the cases that I cover are a little bit older. They're all basically 20 years or older. So if that's something that you might be interested in, maybe go down below, click the subscribe button, and also make sure to turn on the post notifications to be notified every time that I upload. Before we get into the case, I do have to say that today's video is sponsored. We have a sponsor and it is Rocket Money. If you know me at all, you know that I do not partner with a company unless I thoroughly believe in them and spend my own money on the product or for their service. So when I was reached out to by Rocket Money, I was pretty excited because I've been using their app for 2 years now. Actually, this month, it's been 2 years. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and manage your money better, which for those 3 reasons is exactly why I downloaded the app back in September of 2022. You can safely and securely cancel unwanted subscription charges with just a couple of taps. No need to call customer service, which I know we all dread doing. They will negotiate your bills for you. They can also analyze your current spending habits, and you can customize a budget for different categories of spending in your life, and you will get a notification on your phone if you've exceeded that limit. They have helped their customers on average save up to $740 a year when they use the features I mentioned, and there have been over $500 million in canceled subscriptions across their 5 million members. If you want to try Rocket Money yourself, you can go to rocketmoney.com/gabulosis or click the link in the description to get started for free. You can also unlock even more features with premium. That's rocketmoney.com/gabulosis to get started for free. Thank you, Rocket Money, for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's get into the case. So today we are going over our second case this year for Solve September. And I do have to say that I was on the fence when it came to covering this case this month or not, and that was for one main reason. Today's case is one that was officially declared solved, but many people out there have the opinion that there just isn't enough evidence or clues to justify closing the case. The case was never brought to trial and there's never been any convictions in it. It's very odd that it was completely closed, but authorities feel like they have their guys. For September, I usually stick to covering cases that are neatly wrapped up at the end, a case with a bittersweet conclusion, but it is important to cover the ones that still overall leave people wondering, is there more to the story? Of course, this video is in no way me attempting to question the intelligence of the investigators who worked on this case. It's just the overall consensus of those who have looked into it. With all of that being said, this is the solved case of Joyce Chiang. I do have to mention quickly that a lot of sources out there will pronounce her last name as Chiang, but it seems based on my sources, and this includes direct interviews with her brother, her last name is pronounced Chung. Joyce Chiang, the sole daughter of Taiwanese immigrants Mutang and Judy Chung, was born on December 7th of 1970 in Chicago, Illinois. Mutang and Judy were proud parents to 4 children. Alongside Joyce was her brother John, her brother Robert, and her brother Roger. Joyce was raised in a caring household that emphasized the importance of a good education. It paid off because Joyce and her brothers would all end up having successful careers following their separate passions. During her final year, she took the role of president in the Student Government Association, and in 1992, she proudly earned her degree. After completing her summer internship, Joyce transitioned into a role as a legislative aide in Congressman Howard Berman's office, while simultaneously pursuing evening classes at Georgetown University Law Center. She successfully obtained a law degree in 1995. From everything that I just said, it is obvious to tell that Joyce Chiang was an extremely dedicated person who took school seriously. She had a purpose in life, and that was to land a prosperous profession. Her determination was beneficial because she ended up having a government job. At the time of this case, Joyce worked as an attorney in the General Counsel's office for the former Immigration and Naturalization Service. The INS was an agency of the U.S. Department of Labor from 1933 to 1940, and the U.S. Department of Justice from 1940 until it was abolished in 2003. Joyce had made the move to Washington, D.C. when the rest of her family decided to move back to Southern California. Due to what she was planning on doing in her life, this was truly the perfect place for her to continue that path. She didn't live alone, though, though, she lived with her brother, Roger Chung, who at the time was working for the US Department of Housing and Urban Development. This living situation was pretty ideal for the both of them. They shared an apartment in DuPont Circle, which is a popular residential area in Washington, D.C. Overall, one of the safer neighborhoods in that section of the district. Joyce was most certainly a go-getter, but she was also simply a kind person. She loved to help others. She did a lot of charity work in her free time, and as her brother Roger would say, she was always doing good deeds. Now let's get into the day of her disappearance, also the suspected day the 28-year-old's life was taken. January 9th of 1999. Friday and Saturday nights in DuPont Circle are pretty lively considering there were and still are a lot of places to dine, socialize, maybe even grab a drink. On this night, Roger was home alone, but Joyce had gone out to a movie and dinner with some friends of hers. It started getting later and one of her friends offered her a ride to her apartment. Joyce told her friend that instead of being dropped off at her apartment, she wanted to be dropped off at her nearby Starbucks so she could grab a cup of tea before she headed home. This Starbucks at the time was located across the street from where she was dropped off at the intersection of Connecticut Avenue Northwest and R Street Northwest. It was about 4 blocks from Joyce and Roger's apartment. The last verified sighting of Joyce alive was her friend seeing her walk towards Starbucks that night at around 8:25 p.m. As hours passed, Roger was at their apartment wondering where his sister might be, but he wasn't worrying at this point because, of course, she was 28 years old and had a life of her own. He only really started to grow concerned when he woke up Sunday to find that she still wasn't home, and it was obvious that she hadn't been home. He hadn't heard the door open during the night or during the early morning hours, nothing was moved in the apartment, and no food in the fridge or pantry was eaten. He thought that possibly she had just spent the night at a friend's house, but it was odd that she wouldn't have at least phoned to let him know that she was okay. Again, though, she was a grown woman. She didn't have to let her younger brother know her every move. Or at least that's what he was telling himself to ease his anxiety over the situation. Another day passed and he still hadn't heard a word. He contacted friends and coworkers of hers and no one had seen or heard from her either. On Tuesday, January 12th, he phoned the local authorities and the FBI. Now you might be wondering why the FBI was informed of her disappearance so early on in this case. It's because she was a federal employee. When someone working a government job goes missing or is found murdered, it is usually immediately handed over to the Federal Bureau of Investigation for multiple reasons, but primarily because this person may have been targeted due to their employment. A missing persons report was filed for Joyce Chiang, and the FBI took the lead when it came to investigating into her disappearance. The first thing that they did was attempt to construct a timeline of the last day anyone had seen her. This would give them a better idea as to where she went and who she possibly came in contact with. This is how they pieced together her last hours, mostly with the help of her friends and coworkers. She had met a friend for coffee in the afternoon. A little bit later, she went to the movies and to dinner with some friends, mostly from work. And then finally, she was dropped off at Starbucks by a friend, a part of this group. At the time of her disappearance, she was wearing a hooded green coat that went down to her thighs, a black turtleneck, light wash denim jeans, and a red paisley scarf. Authorities decided to go to the Starbucks she was dropped off at and talk to some of the employees that were working there that night and see if any of them remember seeing Joyce. From my research, it seems like Starbucks did go through a period of time in the early 2000s where it wasn't receiving the amount of customers it had in previous years, but in 1999, it had a pretty steady flow of patrons, Joyce being one of them. This Starbucks was frequented by her. It was her main place to go for coffee or tea. It seems though that none of the employees there that had been working during the night of January 9th remembered seeing her. We do have to remember though that they probably had hundreds of people come in that Saturday night, and unless the person was somebody that stood out to them in some way or was close to one of the workers there, chances are they wouldn't easily be memorable in such a fast-paced environment with plenty of people coming and going. Also, there was no security footage. Authorities decided to look around Joyce's bedroom to see if they could find any clues. It didn't seem like Joyce had any plans for that night after getting her tea from Starbucks, but maybe there was something left behind that could lead them to her whereabouts or paint a better picture for them as to where she could have gone. Possibly someone picked her up after she left the coffee shop, but who would have picked her up? They could see that she brought all the usual things with her that she would on a day out, like her purse, but she did leave her pager behind. For anyone a bit younger that might not know what a pager is, they were these little devices that would show you the number of who was calling your phone. I never had one myself because by the time I was old enough to get a phone, I got the Razor, but I wanted one so bad when I was little that my parents got me a pink toy one from the dollar store. Back to the case though. On this pager, they discovered one call had come in for Joyce since her disappearance. This was strangely a single call from a payphone outside of a hotel near the Dulles International Airport, an airport in Northern Virginia about 26 miles from downtown Washington, D.C. They unfortunately were unable to ever discover who called her that night from the payphone. This is still a mystery. They decided to look into any love interests of hers. It didn't seem like she had anyone she was currently romantically involved with, but they did briefly question an ex-boyfriend. WUSA would report, though, that this individual seemed to check out to authorities because he wasn't questioned any further. They would soon discover that some of Joyce's belongings had turned up only a day after she went missing. The people who were holding them, though, didn't come forward because they had no idea they belonged to a local missing woman. On January 10th of 1999, a couple was strolling through Anacostia Park, one of the largest and most important recreational areas in Washington, D.C., when they later stumbled upon a billfold a little outside the park. Inside of it was Joyce's INS ID and an expired credit card. They handed the billfold over to park police and it was filed in the park's lost and found. The Anacostia Park area is roughly 6 miles southeast of DuPont Circle. 4 days after the billfold was located, FBI officials were notified of the finding of the billfold by the couple who recognized her photo in the local news, and officials headed to Anacostia Park to obtain the billfold. The couple told them that they had handed it over to be put in the lost and found for the park, but they hadn't actually found it in the park. They had been a little outside of the park, right near the Anacostia River, and that is where the billfold was found. At this point, authorities knew that they had to take a closer look at the river. Maybe more of her belongings were in the river, or as tragic as it is, maybe she was in the river. On January 21st, during the search of the river and surrounding area, they located Joyce's main ID card and her coat, the one that she had been wearing the night that she was last seen. It had been ripped down the back of it. Joyce's coat and ID card were located near a traffic circle near the entrance of the Naval Support Facility at Anacostia, a naval base close to where the Anacostia River meets the Potomac River. From there, a search of the park was organized, and as a result of this search, they discovered the keys to her apartment, her Safeway card, her Blockbuster card, and her gloves. Many of Joyce's cards were located, but there was one that wasn't in her billfold or found anywhere in the park, and that was her debit card. They would locate it later on, and we'll get to that soon, but after contacting her bank, they discovered that her card hadn't been used since she went missing. All of this terrified and sickened her loved ones. They were hoping for the best, but it didn't seem like the outcome was going to be a good one. The only one that lived in Washington, D.C. with Joyce was her 26-year-old brother, Roger, but the one in her family that she was the closest to was her brother, John. Roger was quoted saying, "John and Joyce, the two J's in the family, have very similar personalities." He went on to say they really look at each other as advisors. Both of them are attorneys. Both of them go to each other for matters that are professional or personal. They really value each other's judgment. It was difficult though for John, the closest family member to her, to do much to help her case due to the fact that at the time he lived out west. It was truly Roger who became the main advocate for his sister's case. He was the one doing the interviews, television appearances, and talking the most with authorities. At this point, a $45,000 reward was put forth by the FBI, the INS, and friends and family of hers for any information leading to the discovery of what happened to her. Roger spent almost every day in some way trying to spread the word of his sister's disappearance. Every week he was holding a candlelight vigil in DuPont Circle for his sister, and every time dozens of people would show up to show their support. That's just how much he cared. He was doing everything he could to try to find out what happened to her, and authorities were as well, mostly near the beginning. They were covering large areas of land and water while also questioning anyone they thought had any connection to Joyce. During their search of Anacostia River, they would actually locate a body near the Frederick Douglass Bridge, not far from where her coat and ID had been found. But this body did not belong to Joyce, and they knew that immediately because it belonged to a man. A man they eventually ruled out as having any connection to Joyce's case. It was bone-chilling, though, the fact that they located a body while searching for another. The search for Joyce Chiang continued. Helicopters searched overhead while law enforcement volunteers and cadaver dogs searched on land. The search, though, soon came to a close upon no further findings. Within a day or so of calling off the search, an episode of America's Most Wanted covering Joyce's case aired nationwide on January 23rd of 1999. People who knew her best and those working on her case had their fingers crossed that this would generate some new leads. This did garner some more attention, but every lead brought forward because of the broadcast didn't seem to get them anywhere closer to finding out what happened to her. Based on the clues, the prevailing theory at this time was that she had possibly been abducted. Loved ones did not believe she had left on her own accord. They told reporters that she would have never done that to the ones who cared about her. They were genuinely fearing the worst. The FBI at this point sent Joyce's discovered belongings over for further testing to see if they could find any DNA on them that may belong to another person. Hair left behind, bodily fluids, fingerprints, anything. They did actually end up locating hairs, and these hairs did not belong to Joyce. One sample came from a Caucasian individual and the other from an African American individual. Joyce was Asian American, so they knew neither of the hair samples were hers. This information may be purposely kept from the public, but whether authorities ever did a DNA test on these hairs to see if they could locate the people through genetic genealogy, or if they ever possibly compared them to anyone directly, is something that I could not find out myself. It's a little bit surprising, but authorities didn't even have one suspect at this time. So they didn't even have anyone to compare these samples to if they wanted to. They did look into friends and colleagues of hers to see if they had any possible involvement, but everyone checked out. There was a period of time, though, where they had their eye on the person who was doing the most public advocating for her case: her brother, Roger. He did end up taking a polygraph test. Results were inconclusive, but he stated he believed that was due to him being so nervous. Authorities didn't really have any reason to look at Roger as a solid suspect in his sister's case. They just really didn't have anyone else to look at. Roughly 3 months after she vanished, this case would turn from one of a missing person to one of a possible murder victim. At around 6 p.m. on the evening of April 1st, 1999, a canoeist on the Potomac River, about 8 miles from where her belongings were located, started yelling for someone to call the police. Leslie Brown of Fairfax County, Virginia, sitting quietly in her home, hears the screaming coming from outside. She goes outside to listen closer. She can tell that something is very wrong, so she makes her way closer to the river, and this is when the canoeist informs her that they found a body washed up on the shore of the river. Leslie immediately heads back inside of her home to make the call to 911. When authorities got to the location, they found the badly decomposed remains of a woman. She was wearing the same clothing, minus the coat, that Joyce had been wearing the night that she went missing. At this point, she was a Jane Doe, but they were leaning towards the theory, based on her hair color, height, and clothing, that it was Joyce Chiang. Could she have started out in the Anacostia River and slowly floated downstream into the Potomac River and ended up washing up on the rocky shore? That is possible. The body of the Jane Doe was taken to the medical examiner's office in Virginia, and through DNA testing, they were able to verify that the body did in fact belong to the missing lawyer from Washington, D.C., Joyce Chiang. Roger told Unsolved Mysteries that calling his mother to inform her that her daughter was in fact dead was the hardest thing he ever had to do. Before Joyce was identified, though, they did locate her missing debit card, unexpectedly in one of her socks. When I first heard this, it struck me as odd. Some people have put their money down in their sock before. This isn't uncommon. I'm sure we've all done this before, but I have never heard of someone doing this with a card. Why would anyone have done this? Was it done by the killer to confuse authorities? Had it been done prior by her? If the card was put down in her sock by her, when would she have even done this, considering she had been out with friends and probably using it during the night? And none of her friends ever said that they remembered her putting her card down in her sock. It just doesn't make sense. An autopsy was conducted, and this is where it gets more confusing and ultimately forms a long-running theory that her loved ones did not believe for a second. They could not come to a conclusion regarding her cause of death. There was no evidence that pointed to her being stabbed or shot. There was no fractures on her skeleton. Due to the level of decomposition of her lungs, they also could not verify if she had died as a result of drowning. Could she have died due to strangulation? That is possible, but could never be confirmed. her cause of death was ruled as being inconclusive. This was what began the theory, originating from authorities and only authorities, that she had jumped into the water, taking her own life. Her friends and family did not believe this, and they made that known publicly. There were too many abnormal factors surrounding her death, and she had never displayed any signs to anyone in her life that she was feeling sad, let alone depressed enough to put an end to her life. This wasn't like her at all, and it was almost disrespectful to them that authorities were writing her off in such a way. So much so that Roger actually ended up filing a formal complaint against the Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department.
I like for the information to be fair and accurate, only because there is evidence out there that suggests that foul play was involved the night my sister disappeared. We don't know when she died.
Yeah, you know your sister.
Right, and there are other media reports out there that have been out there that says that may have suggested that my sister committed suicide, but I find that to be wrong, and I take a little objection to that.
Authorities did continue in their search for other answers, because although there was no legitimate proof that she had been murdered, there was no legitimate proof that she hadn't. In July of 1999, a man who worked at Starbucks ended up coming forward, and his story has never been proven as fact, but he claimed that he didn't speak up at first. Possibly he was unsure if it was her or not, but he believes he saw Joyce the night that she disappeared sitting at Starbucks talking with a woman with blonde hair for roughly an hour. This employee sat with a sketch artist and helped them produce a drawing of this woman supposedly seen with Joyce that night. The FBI had this sketch of the woman, but oddly never released it to the public. The reasoning for this is unknown. They could have deemed his story to be untrue, but they've never given a solid answer as to why they never focused in on this mysterious woman who could have been the last person to have seen Joyce that night. It didn't seem like any of Joyce's friends or family knew who this woman could have been, and no one fitting that vague description ever came forward claiming to be her. Today, Starbucks usually closes around 8 to 9 p.m. depending where you're located, but I did a little looking online, and many people stated that they used to work at Starbucks, and some used to be open until 12 a.m., while others used to actually be open 24/7. There are surprisingly some that are still open at these times, but they are few and far between. Considering this was a popular area on a Saturday night back in 1999, and she was dropped off at 8:25 p.m., I'm going to assume that this Starbucks was open later than the usual 9 p.m. For the next year or so, authorities would ping pong between the idea that she took her own life and the theory that foul play was involved. They did end up uncovering that around the time that her life ended, she was under investigation at the INS. Would this issue at work been enough to push her to commit suicide though? Friends and family never believed that. Joyce's case sat on a shelf collecting dust until May of 2001, when media attention was focusing on a disappearance case of a local woman. On May 1st of 2001, 24-year-old Chandra Levy, an intern at the Federal Bureau of Prisons in Washington, D.C., went missing. Both Chandra and Joyce worked government jobs, were petite, had brunette hair, and Chandra ended up moving about 4 blocks away from where Joyce had lived in DuPont Circle. They both also frequented the same Starbucks, the Starbucks that Joyce had been dropped off at. Chandra's case was a bit different though in the type of exposure that it was getting. Her case was turned more into a scandal than anything after it was revealed that she was allegedly having an affair before her disappearance with Congressman Gary Condit. He though has always denied these accusations. Chandra's body would be located on May 22nd of 2002 by a man walking his dog looking for turtles in Rock Creek Park near Broad Branch Creek in Washington, D.C. Her case would sit for 7 years before a man was arrested for her murder in 2009. His name is Ingmar Gwandike, and he was already sitting behind bars for attacks on 2 other women in Rock Creek Park. A fellow inmate of his informed authorities that they heard that he claimed to be the one responsible for Chandra's murder. He was tried and convicted for her murder in February of 2011 and sentenced to 60 years behind bars. In June of 2015, he was granted a new trial, but in 2016, they decided to simply deport him back to his native El Salvador. He was deported on May 7th of 2017. Due to this case not being taken to court again and lack of evidence, Chandra's case is considered unsolved, and the ones dear to her are still fighting for answers. In the end, it is not believed that Chandra's case and Joyce's case are connected in any way. Their cases, though, are often brought up together. A third case also occasionally brought up with their theirs is the case of a 28-year-old Washington, D.C. biology intern named Christine Mirzayan. Christine Mirzayan attended a barbecue held by a fellow intern on August 1st of 1998. She disappeared after she decided to walk back to her Georgetown University dorm. Her remains were located the next day in woods nearby. She had been raped and hit in the head with a boulder. There were 2 witnesses that had seen her earlier being followed by a man, and a witness who heard her screams from the woods. This man who heard the screams also saw a man running out of the woods not long after the screams stopped. A sketch was released to the public of the man that the witnesses spotted that night. Christine's case, though, wouldn't be solved until over 2 decades later when genetic testing with the help of Parabon Nanolabs helped locate the killer. On November 19th of 2019, 60-year-old Giles Daniel Warwick was arrested in Conway, South Carolina. He was not only connected to Christine's murder, but also the rapes of 9 other women between 1991 to 1998. He was a landscaper in Maryland at the time. Most of his victims were in Maryland, but 2 were in Washington, D.C., Christine being one of them. He is known today as the Potomac River Rapist. On November 19th of 2022, though, 11 days before the murder trial for Christine, he was found deceased in his jail cell. It is believed that he took his own life. This man destroyed lives and couldn't even face the consequences of his actions. He couldn't even give loved ones and victims any semblance of peace, knowing that some sort of justice was served and he was sitting in prison for the rest of his life. Due to the ultimate solving of Christine's case, though, authorities do not believe that her case is connected to Joyce's. It's also not believed that Christine's case is connected to Chandra's case in any way. It was Chandra's case, though, mostly due to the political scandal surrounding it that made media start looking into any other local cases. They had focused a bit on Joyce's case, but never to the magnitude of Chandra's. Christine's case wasn't really discussed at all in the media until Chandra's case. It's also sad that Chandra's case probably wouldn't have gained much attention either had she not been sexually linked to a married man in Congress. That is the upsetting reality of these cases, and many people who cover them and advocate for them know that it is rarely advocacy over exploitation in the grand scheme of things. Most media outlets are going to focus more on the cases with either money behind them or a jaw-dropping story to draw viewers in. More views equals more revenue. Not always, but most of the time, which is why so many cases fall under the radar. Season 11, episode 11 of Unsolved Mysteries includes a segment covering Joyce, Chandra, and Christine's cases. During Roger's interview, he highlights that all the women were local interns at one point in their careers, and how they have a few similar physical qualities. Jack Barrett of the MPD, though, was adamant that there was no connection and no similarities between any of them.
All 3 women had dark hair. All 3 women were about the same height, and they were all here as interns at one point in their careers.
There are no similarities in those 3 cases, period.
Authorities were still pushing the theory that Joyce took her own life. Roger and the rest of her family and her friends wanted to start looking into who may have been responsible because they believed someone took her life and that it wasn't her. Roger stated that before Joyce had died, she had made it known to him that she had multiple run-ins with people that made her feel extremely uncomfortable. This included a peeping Tom and another man who followed her one day. Roger also brought forward information that shocked many. On the brick wall in the alley near the Starbucks she was last seen at, there was alarming graffiti found. It read, "Good day, JC. May I never miss the thrill of being near you." JC, obviously Joyce Chiang's initials. Whether it has to do with Joyce, though, is unknown. Could this have been some sort of sick prank, or was it actually left behind by her killer? The person responsible for spray painting it has never been identified. There are so many tiny mysteries in this case, from her torn coat, to the ID in her sock, to the mystery woman at Starbucks, to the person who called her phone, to now this graffiti. For years, this case had Roger advocating front and center, Authorities, unable to make up their minds as to whether they believed that she had been murdered or she took her own life, and John Walsh from America's Most Wanted pushing the theory that both Joyce and Chandra had been murdered by an unknown serial killer targeting women in the area. All while Joyce lay at rest 2,670 miles away in Forest Lawn Cemetery in Los Angeles, California, next to her father, who passed 4 years before her in the year of 1995. Joyce's brother Roger would actually end up working as the executive in charge for America's Most Wanted. This case overall sat at a standstill until the year of 2011, 12 years after her life ended under mysterious circumstances. On May 12th of 2011, news reports announced that Joyce Chiang's case may be solved, but there isn't enough evidence to prosecute the two suspects they have identified. The Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department held a press conference in which they stated that Joyce did not commit suicide, that she is in fact a victim of homicide, and that her case is now considered fully closed. They stated that they believe 3 men abducted Joyce on the night of January 9th, 1999, and took her to an area near Anacostia River where they planned to rob her away from the public. 2 of these men were identified as Steve Allen and Neil Joaquin. These men worked as a team abducting women off the street with the sole intention of transporting them to a more remote area to rob them. Authorities stated that one of the men, Steve Allen, was in prison in Maryland for a different offense, and the other, Neil Joaquin, was living in Guyana, which has no extradition treaty with the United States of America. So bringing him back here for a trial would be impossible. That's even if there was enough evidence to convict him. News reports claim that the third man is not being named publicly because they don't have enough evidence to point to him actually being involved or not, but they suspect that he was. During the press conference, John Walsh stated that they believe the men either pushed Joyce into the icy water of the Anacostia River, or she tried to escape from them and possibly went in the direction of the water, fell in, couldn't make it out, and eventually drowned. Now, this wasn't a theory that was just thrown together last minute. It is stated that authorities were focusing on this one for about a year, that they have enough evidence to believe that they have their guys, but not enough to even attempt to take it to trial, even if they could extradite Neil Joaquin back to the US. The theory of these 2 men possibly having some involvement in Joyce Chiang's death was only brought forward to authorities after word of their involvement spread around the prison Steve was being held at. Steve and Neil had actually been arrested about 3 months after Joyce's death for abducting a woman not far from DuPont Circle, taking her to a secluded area, and robbing her. She was let go though, and it didn't seem like they had any plan to actually take her life. You'd think though that if they were responsible for what happened to Joyce, that after what happened to her, they would have stopped. Strangely, the connection between this robbery and Joyce's case, with her being found miles away from where she was last spotted, was never made. Joyce's family was overjoyed to know that her case was finally considered solved after a decade. But it was devastating that there wouldn't be a conviction. Authorities felt like they had enough to arrest the 2 men if they could, but not enough to convince a jury to come back with a guilty verdict. Most information surrounding the closing of this case has been kept pretty private. What did the men say during any questioning? Did they even question Neil all the way overseas? Was there any DNA evidence connecting them to what happened to Joyce? What about the hair found on her belongings? The sketch of the woman she was supposedly last seen with? There's still so many questions left unanswered.
We can't be any more happier that this police department has acted with integrity and has restored the trust and confidence of my family as well as the community here.
Out of anyone and everyone though, it's really up to her loved ones if that is something that makes them feel more at peace. I'm sure they would more so want to see the men allegedly responsible legally pay for what they did to Joyce, but her family has expressed their appreciation for the closure. Joyce Chiang does live on in positive ways though. Those who love her have made sure to keep her memory alive. For instance, the Joyce Chiang Memorial Scholarship was established to support one student every year with an internship at the Asian American Justice Center in Washington, D.C. Also, at the Georgetown University Law Center, the Joyce Chiang Memorial Award was established. This award goes to a student at the college that demonstrates commitment to public service, which is something Joyce was extremely passionate about. Roger released a book in 2008 covering his sister's case titled My Peace I Offer You, The Disappearance of Joyce Chiang. He went on to release a follow-up book the following year called Travails to Truth, My Peace from Prison. I will have the links to the books down below in the description of this video for anyone that wants to check those out. I will also be linking down below the episode of America's Most Wanted, Unsolved Mysteries, and quite a few interviews that Roger did surrounding Joyce's case. It is just honestly unsettling that two men could do something like this and just basically get away with it. Yes, they most likely are living miserable lives, and I hope so, but because they decided to rob somebody, something that they should not be doing, this girl lost her life. It doesn't even seem like photos of them were even released to the public. If these men were 100% responsible for Joyce's death, in my opinion, they did not learn anything from it and did not regret it at all, considering 3 months later they went on to rob somebody else where that same thing could have happened. Joyce seemed like such an incredible person. She was so kind and bubbly and so smart, and I feel like she would have done some amazing things in her life. Like always, you never know who may stumble across this video, so leave some kind words down in the comments below for the loved ones of Joyce Chiang. Thank you all for taking a little bit of time out of your day to hear about Joyce's case, and if there are any other cases that you possibly want me to cover here on my channel, especially solved cases for Solved September, you can send those requests over to gabulosiscaserequests@gmail.com. I hope you all have an amazing rest of your day, stay safe, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.